Hello everyone, in this session we'll be learning about the sections of the brain. We'll be learning about the coronal as well as the horizontal sections of the brain. So sections, students find it very difficult in neuroanatomy, and that's why I've decided to take up this topic. And I also have got 3D models for better understanding. So please watch the video till the end. Okay. So in sections, first of all, we need to understand the relationship of the lateral ventricle with the surrounding structures. Okay, there is many gray matter and white matter surrounding the lateral ventricle. So to understand the section, first we need to understand the relationship of these structures. For this, there is a 3D schematic video which is available. You will first watch that video and then I'll continue on the actual brain specimens. Okay, in that way you'll understand better. Okay, so first watch that.
Basal ganglia anatomy. This is a model of the ventricles. In this view, you can identify the lateral ventricle with its anterior horn, inferior horn, and posterior horn. In the middle, you can see the third ventricle. It is connected to the fourth ventricle by the cerebral aqueduct. This ventricle model will be a point of reference for the conceptual overview of basal ganglia anatomy. Another point of reference is the thalamus. It is located on either side of the third ventricle. The first nucleus of the basal ganglia we will insert is the caudate nucleus. The caudate nucleus is a tadpole-shaped nucleus that swings around the thalamus following the lateral ventricle. Its head is in the floor of the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle. Its body follows the lateral ventricle. The tail is in the roof of the inferior horn. The caudate nucleus is separated from the other basal ganglia nuclei by a fiber bundle. These are nerve fibers traveling to and from the cortex. The most superior portion of this bundle is the corona radiata. It converges to the internal capsule, and then the fibers travel through the cerebral peduncle. The globus pallidus is located lateral to the internal capsule. It can be divided into an internal and external part. The putamen is located lateral to the globus pallidus. The caudate nucleus and the putamen are of common embryologic origin. They are separated by the internal capsule. The most anterior portion of the caudate and the putamen are fused and referred to as the nucleus accumbens or ventral striatum. There are numerous connecting fibers between the putamen and the caudate nucleus. These connecting fibers that pass through the internal capsule give these two nuclei a striped appearance. The caudate nucleus and putamen are also called striatum.
Okay, so now you all know how the brain is related with the lateral ventricle and the surrounding structures, the caudate nucleus, the lentiform nucleus, the internal capsule which is present in between them. Okay, so once you have understood that, now you will be able to understand sections in a better way. So in here we can see the brain viewed from the superior aspect. This is the anterior part of the brain. This is the posterior part of the brain. And for exam point of view, three sections are very important. Section passing through the anterior horn, section passing through the body, and section passing through the posterior horn of the lateral ventricle. In this brain, one additional section we have taken that is at the anterior most end of the anterior horn. Okay, so actually four sections are taken in this brain. There is the section 1 that is taken at the anterior most end. There is section 2, and there is the third section here, and fourth section is here. Okay, for exam point of view, relations, these three are very important. In subsequent slides I'll show you. So here is the section number 1 passing through the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle. Section number 2 is also passing from the anterior horn. Section 3 is passing through the body, and section 4 is passing through the posterior horn of the lateral ventricle. Okay, when we take this section, two views are possible. We can view from this side, we can view from this side. Okay, similarly for the other sections, So first of all, let me explain you how these sections were taken. Here there is a space between the two cerebral hemisphere that is referred to as longitudinal cerebral fissure. We can pass a brush in between this two cerebral hemisphere in this space, and that brush will go and reach up to the genu of the corpus callosum. Okay, and if we take a section directly at the genu, this kind of section will come. Okay, if we go 1 centimeter behind it and then take a section, this section will come. Okay, so first of all we should know what is the junction between the anterior horn and the body of the lateral ventricle. There is a opening of lateral ventricle called as foramen of Monro. Okay, foramen of Monro marks the junction of anterior horn and the body. Okay, so if sections are taken in front of it, those sections will pass in anterior horn. And for section passing through the body, there's an important landmark called as the mammillary bodies. When we take a section at the mammillary body, it will pass through the body of the lateral ventricle. Okay, and for section 4, this section is passing through the posterior horn. For this, the brush was passed from the posterior aspect and we reach the splenium of the corpus callosum, and section is taken directly at the splenium of the corpus callosum. Okay, now let us understand each sections one by one. Okay, so here we can see this section, this view shown in this image. The other sided view is shown in this image. Okay, so what we can see, the anterior most end of the anterior horn is seen in this image, right? That's the region of anterior horn, and we can see the anterior horn is ending here. Okay, and which structure is this? This is the genu of the corpus callosum, and there are some white matter fibers extending. Those are referred to as forceps minor. Okay, the fibers which go in front of the genu of the corpus callosum. And there is the same section viewed from the other side. There is also anterior horn of the lateral ventricle. Okay, the caudate nucleus, lentiform nucleus, those are not seen very clearly in this specimen, and that's why one more section was taken that was 1 centimeter behind it. Okay, so for exam point of view, this section is important. We'll see that now. Okay, so this section is also passing through the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle. Here the various boundaries of the anterior horn are much clear. In the midline, there is a septum called as septum pellucidum. Septum pellucidum. So that forms the medial wall. Roof, it's formed by white matter fiber. That's the body of the corpus callosum. Floor is also by white matter fiber. That is referred to as rostrum of the corpus callosum. Okay. Roof, body, floor, rostrum, and anterior wall, it's formed by genu of the corpus callosum that we saw in the previous image. Okay, and lateral wall is formed by a gray matter here that's referred to as the caudate nucleus. Okay, and again there is some white matter fibers seen, that's of internal capsule, and lateral to it again there is gray matter, that's the lentiform nucleus. Okay, let's understand it in a much better way in a 3D model. So here we can see section is passing through the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle. So how to identify this anterior horn? So we can see the head of the caudate nucleus, which is large, then internal capsule and the lentiform nucleus. Okay, midline there is septum pellucidum, and I'll tell you points when we see the body of the lateral ventricle, how to differentiate that from this. Okay, so first of all, in a section as a whole, you should know on the outer aspect there is a gray matter called as cerebral cortex. Then intermediate part there is white matter, and again on the inner aspect there is gray matter in the form of the caudate nucleus, lentiform nucleus, as well as thalamus that we'll be seeing in the section passing through the body. Okay, so this is section passing through anterior horn of the lateral ventricle. Okay, now this section is passing through the body of the lateral ventricle. Section was taken at the level of mammillary bodies. Okay, so some part of mammillary body is also seen in this. Various boundaries of the body of the lateral ventricle, let's try to identify now. So this section, first understand the view. We are viewing it from the anterior aspect here, and from the other side in this image we can see. Okay, so roof is formed by body of the corpus callosum. Floor, from lateral to medial there are multiple structures. So which are those structures? There is the body of caudate nucleus. Then there is two small structures called as thalamostriate vein and stria terminalis, and there is one gray matter, large gray matter seen, that's called as the thalamus. Okay, and medial wall it's formed by septum pellucidum, and in the lower part some part of fornix is seen. Fornix is a kind of white matter fiber that is seen here. Okay, so these are the structures forming the boundaries of the body of lateral ventricle. When section passes through the body, two other important structures are seen. One is the third ventricle in the midline and the inferior horn of the lateral ventricle. Okay, so body, third ventricle and inferior horn of lateral ventricle, all three are seen together in one section. Okay, if it is seen, that means we can say there is a section passing through body of lateral ventricle. Okay, this won't be seen in the section passing through anterior horn or the posterior horn. Okay, and so inferior horn is visible. We should know the boundaries of that as well. So here only roof and floor, two boundaries you need to remember. For the inferior horn, roof is formed by tail of the caudate nucleus. Okay, here there is caudate nucleus, here is the body of the caudate nucleus. Okay, caudate nucleus bends around, and here there comes the tail of the caudate nucleus. Okay, and also white matter fibers which are there, those are referred to as tapetum. Okay, so tail of caudate nucleus, tapetum, and also some part of stria terminalis. Okay, those are seen at the roof, and floor is formed by two bulges. Okay, one medial bulge is called as the hippocampal eminence. Hippocampus produces that bulge, and lateral bulge is formed by collateral sulcus. Okay, the eminence is referred to as collateral eminence. Okay, so hippocampal eminence and collateral eminence, two structures forming the floor. Okay, let's see it in a 3D model. Here we can see the section passing through the body of the lateral ventricle. So we can see body, third ventricle, as well as the inferior horn. All three important structures are seen in one section. That's why this is section passing through the body. And boundaries we had discussed. Apart from the boundaries, few additional structures we need to remember. Lateral to the thalamus there is white matter seen, that is referred to as the internal capsule. Lateral to it again there is grey matter, that is lentiform nucleus. Here also if we carefully observe, medial part there is globus pallidus, and on the lateral part there is the putamen. Okay, and more lateral to it there is a white matter called as external capsule. Then lateral to it there is a grey matter called as claustrum. More lateral to it there is extreme capsule, and more lateral to it there is insular lobe of the cerebral hemisphere. Okay, there is one insular lobe which is there. Okay, so multiple structures from medial to lateral we should be able to identify in this section. Okay, now let's look at this section passing through the posterior horn of the lateral ventricle. So understand the view first. We are viewing from this side in this image, and other side we are viewing in this image. Okay, so this section is passing through posterior horn, but there is a catch here. This section passes through posterior horn as well as body and inferior horn. Okay, all three. That's why this section looks very large. Okay, actual posterior horn is one which extends behind towards the occipital pole. Okay, but this section is taken at the level of splenium. Okay, when we take at the level of splenium, body, inferior horn and posterior horn, all three come together, and that area together is referred to as collateral trigone. Okay, collateral trigone. It has got one another name called as atrium of the ventricles. Okay, atrium of the ventricles means it is like union of the adjacent parts of the lateral ventricle. Okay, atrium, you have heard it in heart, but in brain also if asked where is the atrium, so that's the answer. Collateral trigone is referred to as atrium of the ventricle. Okay, if we take the section exactly at the posterior horn, then both sided cerebral hemispheres will separate out, because splenium we know it will end at one particular point, and behind there is no connection between the two cerebral hemisphere. Okay, so to keep the brain specimen intact, section is taken at the level of splenium, and it also passes through body and the inferior horn. Okay, so this part is actually the inferior horn of lateral ventricle. Body is the central part, and the part which is extending behind is the posterior horn of the lateral ventricle. Okay, And boundaries of the posterior horn, the medial wall, it's important here. There are two bulges which are seen. One bulge is by the forceps major, okay, splenium of the corpus callosum, the fibers which extend behind, that is referred to as forceps major, that produces a bulge here. And one more bulge is by a sulcus which is present on the medial aspect, the collateral sulcus, that produces a bulge called as the collateral eminence. Okay, so two bulges are seen in the posterior horn, and also we had seen in the inferior horn two bulges were there. Okay, and the remaining part, roof, lateral wall, and some part of the inferior wall, everything, all areas covered by white matter, that is referred to as tapetum. Okay, more lateral to it there is some optic radiation that would be seen, and more lateral to it there is inferior longitudinal fasciculus. Okay, so all those things are there. So to identify section passing through the posterior horn, the section or the lateral ventricle itself would look very large, and it would look as diverging. Okay, it is looking as diverging away. That's how it is identified. Okay, so this is about the posterior horn. Now let's cover the section which is horizontal. Okay, so horizontal section of the brain. So to take the horizontal section, is there any particular anatomical landmark? There is one opening called as foramen of Monro, right? The two lateral ventricles open into the third ventricle. Foramen of Monro forms the junction of anterior horn and the body. Okay, and that same foramen of Monro is also taken as a guide for the horizontal section. In a mid-sagittal section, we can identify the foramen of Monro and take the exact section. When we take a complete brain specimen section, approximate level of foramen of Monro is taken, and the section has been taken. So there is the genu of the corpus callosum in the front, splenium of corpus callosum is behind, and the white matter fibers which extend in the front, those are referred to as forceps minor. Fibers extending behind is forceps major. Okay, why is it so? Because the distance between the genu and the frontal pole, it is 4 centimeters. Distance between the splenium and the occipital pole, this distance is 6 centimeters. Okay, that's why the anterior one is minor, posterior one is major. And various other gray matters which are seen here. This is the head of the caudate nucleus, and this is thalamus. Lateral to it we can see white matter, that's the internal capsule. Okay, various parts are also seen, that's the anterior limb, and there is genu and posterior limb of the internal capsule, and then there is one retrolentiform part. Okay, more lateral to it, this gray matter seen, that's the lentiform nucleus. Then again lateral to it there is external capsule, claustrum, extreme capsule, then insular lobe, just like we saw in the coronal section. Okay, similar things are seen here. Okay, so in the horizontal section, identification of forceps minor, major, head of caudate nucleus, thalamus, internal capsule, lentiform nucleus, and small structures lateral to it. All these things are important. Okay, now a small pictorial quiz for you all. So an image would be posted, and try to identify that image. Like, it's a section passing through which part of the brain? Is it a coronal section, horizontal section? Okay, so let's begin. Yes, identify this section. Section passing through which part of the lateral ventricle? See, the ventricular cavity is looking very small, and that's the anterior end of the anterior horn. Okay, so this section passing through the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle. This fibers is the genu of corpus callosum. We cannot see the third ventricle, we cannot see the inferior horn, we cannot see a large uh, diverging part which is seen in the posterior horn. Okay, so this is the section passing through the anterior horn. We can see some gray matter here, that's the head of the caudate nucleus. Okay, yes, identify this section now. Section passing through which part of lateral ventricle? Here we can see the body of the lateral ventricle, and here is the inferior horn of the lateral ventricle, and in the midline there is third ventricle. Okay, so if all three things are seen together, then it's the section passing through body of the lateral ventricle. Identify this section now. Yes, we can see a large diverging cavity of the lateral ventricle. Okay, and in the midline here we can see the splenium of the corpus callosum. So this is a section passing through the posterior horn of the lateral ventricle. Okay, identify this section now. So here also there is clear cut body, third ventricle, inferior horn. Okay, all three things are seen together. So this section is also passing through the body of the lateral ventricle. So additionally, some parts of the brainstem cerebellum are also seen in this section. Yes, identify this section. First of all, see whether it's a coronal section or a horizontal section. Yes, it is a one-sided horizontal section. Okay, in the image that we learned, both-sided horizontal section was seen together. But in exams, only one-sided horizontal section may also be kept. So here also we should be able to identify the forceps minor, forceps major, then the head of the caudate nucleus, thalamus, the internal capsule, lateral to it there is the lentiform nucleus. Okay. So this was all about this particular session, and please do watch other sessions of this YouTube channel. Okay. Thank you.